Hello and welcome to MarketMuse webinar on using keyword resources to identify and prioritize content opportunities. I am your host, Jeff Coyle. I'm the co-founder and chief product officer for MarketMuse, and we have with us today a really special guest and a friend of ours and a friend of mine, Ewen Finser. He is the partner at Owl Mountain, and he's the co-founder of Venture Forth. And so I just want to introduce him and get a little bit of some details about you. And can you tell us a little bit about Owl Mountain as well as Venture Forth and what they do?
Sure. No, well, it's great to be here, first of all, and thanks for having me. Been a long-time fan of MarketMuse, but yeah. So my background, just in general, Venture Force Media was a company that I built kind of from the ground up, content sites, primarily leveraging display advertising and affiliate revenue, and that was founded about 2014. And the initial motivation was, hey, how do I get out of my day job? But since then, kind of built into more of a media holding company, got it up to over $500,000 in earnings annually, and then more recently, Owl Mountain is kind of my evolution in thinking of how do we take investor capital and apply it to the space, not just for building sites from scratch, but also acquiring content sites and instituting professional management, marketing tactics, and also, again, getting back to content and keyword, implementing kind of scrappy content strategies to increase the ROI. So that's where we are today, and we're looking to basically deploy capital in efficient ways, and primarily with content sites.
Oh, excellent. I love to hear you say the word scrappy, because that guarantees that I'm going to ask you a question about some scrappy tactic that the viewers may want to take part in. And then recently you had some interesting with the hurricanes. MarketMuse, our headquarters is in Boston, and we also have offices in New York and Montreal for our data science team. But I'm located in Georgia in an office, and so I was impacted lightly by a hurricane. But I know that you had some interesting experience having just moved to North Carolina.
Yeah, so we had this wonderful idea of moving from the metro New York area to the south to North Carolina. We were so excited about it. We wouldn't have to put up with the winters anymore. And then literally 2 months after we moved, we get the hurricane coming in. So we're in the Raleigh-Durham, the Tech Triangle. So we were okay, but I'm also in the National Guard, and we were activated. So I got to go forecast flood levels and
oh, wow.
and try to predict not only where the storm was coming, but collect information on what areas were being impacted and supporting emergency management. So disclaimer, the DoD has not approved this message. but that's part of what I do. Is I kind of hang up my entrepreneur's hat on weekends and go do that. And then when things like this happen, it's part of the job, and it can be very rewarding, but also it's a very can be stressful too. But it's just glad it's kind of wrapping up, and a lot of people were saved, which was great, and it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I did want to mention it just to brag on you a little. I know that's really awesome stuff. So jumping into keywords. And so, the majority of, this is kind of the setup for a lot of discussions about keyword research and really identifying opportunities that are out there with content. And so Ewen's really, one of the core values of what Ewen focuses on is really focusing on building great content inventory, building content that tells a story around whatever it is the business goals he's created. But traditionally there's been a real gap in what keyword practices are out there. And so the first question I have for Ewen was, the majority of marketers and people just getting into the game are still using only kind of some free tools, maybe Google AdWords Keyword Planner, for all of their organic research. What, from your perspective and your experience, what does that leave on the table? What opportunity does that leave on the table for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think in my view, a lot. I think there's a few. I could go on. There's a bunch, but I'd say the top issues I have with kind of just doing that approach is one, being able to access kind of the right kind of competition metrics. So, how competitive is it? Different tools have different algorithms to how do they determine that. And I find that, that's really important. I need to know, basically, I need to prioritize. That's what it comes down to. How do you prioritize where you're going to spend your time and money when it comes to content? And if you don't have a good gauge on what's an achievable ranking, given what your business model is, what your authority is, then you're kind of going to be setting yourself up for failure, or at least wasting a lot of money and time. The other thing I see, and this is, even though I do have a very keyword centric strategy, I do think sometimes it's easy to get wrapped up in an individual keyword. And I think, again, not to jump ahead, but I think one of the things that, for me, that MarketMuse helps me do is be able to kind of look at the topic as a whole. And that's kind of something intuitively I've been trying to tune into, is how do we create content that not only answers one query, but is answering the overall intent, the kind of, and Jeff, you probably have a better term for this, but the kind of the basket, if you will, of closely related topics that the searcher is not only directly interested in, but could be kind of have an ancillary interest in. And so that's really why I think tools are super helpful to really suss out, hey, what one was the competition, and two, what does this ecosystem look like, not just this individual phrase.
Now, I want to definitely dig into your tactics for competitive analysis and competitive cohort profiling, because I know that goes into your decisions of buying websites, investing big money into content. So we'll definitely address that. That's a great point. And how much does, you mentioned not getting too hung up on individual keywords. How much does the commodity data that comes from various solutions for volume, how much does that drive the bus in how you make decisions? I think that a lot of folks are saying, volume, that, everybody likes to say SEO is dead, but a lot of people are saying volume is dead. How do you think about a keyword volume as your North Star?
Yeah, so I guess a good reference point, good examples, back in the day, people would build really kind of micro-targeted sites around, best hunting knives or something. Would be the whole site would just be about that. You may look at the volume, and that, there's enough volume to support a site. I think the way I look at it now is, obviously I've expanded the scope. I look at, bigger sites, but also I'm trying to look at baskets of keywords. So I'm looking at, if we're talking about, again, running shoes as an example, what is the total volume? There's many different queries that people will enter that are related enough that you can basket them together. And so I love going after those long tails. So, again, I think I would agree that I think the head terms, like if you're trying to rank for payday loans or something, like that's insanely competitive. But even in niches like financial services, you can find these long tail phrases and these kind of groups of long tail intent that you can deliver exactly what they're looking for and end up having a better conversion rate. And yeah, maybe you're not getting the most volume, but you're ending up kind of getting a better ROI on your time and your money.
So as far as grouping words and grouping them into intent groups, how do you typically think about that? Do you think about that as far as a buy cycle? Do you think about it as, really getting into the head of the reader or of the potential prospect if you're in, B2B generating leads? How do you think about grouping intent groups?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of, this is just how we've built our business, is we really care about high intent commercial keywords, because we basically want to interrupt that person in the final step of decision making. So we're definitely filling a value gap in that someone is looking for example, what are the best running shoes for bad knees or something like that. If we can answer that, we know that they have a higher percentage chance of converting. So we kind of want to group people, all the related keywords to that high intent phrase. Well, it's nice to know about like what's the average monthly searches for running shoes to get an overall size of the market. We specifically know what our business model is relative to that. We're not an e-commerce store, so we're basically kind of more of a consumer report style, I guess, company, if you will. So we're trying to interrupt during that last mile, kind of grouping together keywords around, again, in this example would be, what are all the different concerns with and ways of asking the question, how do I find the right shoes for bad knees? So it could be, you might want to put in like, there's something around specific knee injuries or things like that. Or you might want to talk about being overweight and things like that, that are kind of closely related to that topic.
So the follow-up to that, I would say, would be how often do you find, because obviously if you're going to take that approach, you better be very confident in the competition, the competition metrics. And actually there was a question from the webinar audience as you were talking about competition. You better be really confident in that, because in a very high competition zone, you're going to need content that spans the entire user intent profile landscape. So
Yep.
if you're not strong at understanding, that's a bad example, but what is a running shoe anyway?
Yeah.
If you don't have that content that really tells a story that you're an expert on your site, if you're just putting out late stage problem solving content or query specific user long tail, you're not going to have a lot of success. How have you kind of towed that line and rode that knife edge?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting point. I think one of the things we're doing is we want an all of the above strategy. So yes, we do want the foundation content. I think a lot of it comes down to sequencing and depending on what kind of budget you have. So, for example, I have built sites entirely on long tail phrases that don't have any kind of this informational pillar content, but that is not a sustainable, I think, strategy over the long term. What you really want to do is be able to understand the topical tree, essentially, of building in that reference material, that foundation material, that then kind of creates a nice little silo structure down to your money articles. But I think that's where, again, assuming you can fill in that supporting content, like being able to chase those super specific keywords, almost like if you think about a tree, all the way out to the end limbs, essentially. That's kind of been my approach. So, for some of our sites, we've had to backfill. We have to go back in and say, okay, now that we know that so it's a little bit, it's like it's a market validation for me. Like if I know I can create this content on this super long tail phrase without any supporting content on this brand new site that has zero domain authority and it's generating revenue and getting traffic, then I know, like, bing, 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 like I can create this ecosystem behind it. So for me, testing the market is very important with, what is the best case scenario, what is the overall competition level. And the thing I think what sometimes missed with tools, even the best tools, you have to have a high degree of confidence in their competition score. Yes, but even those tools, you don't really know until you actually publish content. And so that's kind of what we want to solve for. What I've seen an extreme reverse example is someone, that might build out this entire web of really super high intent or high value informational content, reference content, and then just to find out that, hey, like this niche is so hard to crack, and then you have to, kind of rethink your whole strategy. So maybe it's a little bit unconventional, but I think that's the definition of, like, when I say scrappy, like show me the money before, I commit 100% of my budget to building out this Wikipedia of whatever niche I'm in.
Well, I think a couple things that you said there are interesting. One, to some classes of marketers, what you're saying is dramatically scary to them, because having that tactical approach is something that, some larger teams might be shocked that there's that targeted approach to identifying the intent. And but I did want to ask a question. You said money pages. What's that mean to you? Like, how do you define what that is? Like, I couldn't let that go. That's a vocabulary word we need to explore. So.
Yeah, for sure. So for me, money pages, it's basically, where the commercial transactions take place. So, the way I think about it is the supporting content, reference content, informational content, that kind of all feeds to a certain purpose, which is to influence the reader to make a decision. If your model is you're just a general site and your model is, you'd say you're a news network and it's just, hey, get eyeballs, or, I mean, that's one thing, but I think kind of where I'm particularly interested in is how do we get to that sale, that decision-making point where someone says, yes, this article has now influenced me to make that decision to buy something, to click something, essentially. And so those are our money pages, are where we have the highest value kind of conversion activities taking place.
No, that's really important. I think that's a lot of depending on whether you're talking to someone who's in conversion rate optimization or search engine optimization or specifically in content strategy, a lot of the jargon is unique, and that's something that when the purchase decision or the decision that you connect to your KPIs
Right.
occurs, if you can isolate that and expand that. Maybe that page is targeted for one industry, but you service 7 industries. Why don't you have 7 versions of that money page that are geared specifically towards that audience? So if you can figure out the places where those decisions are made effectively and think, am I doing enough? Am I covering everyone? Am I covering all the intent profiles? And I've got a screen up here that talks about, this is how the search engines are thinking about this now.
Mm-hmm.
This may solve the problem if I'm in military and defense, right? And that's what is targeted. But in commercial real estate, it's not. But if I service that audience, why don't I have a similar version of that targeted page?
100%.
That's a great. I think it's a great point. It's something really important. A couple questions from the audience. One, I'll field one of them, and then I'd love to take yours. It was, what if competition is only a degree of off page? What other methodologies of competitive analysis are included that aren't off page? And I'll say, what we at MarketMuse do is we evaluate the competitors that are in that landscape, all of their content. So I'm looking to identify, are they very good at covering this topic, related topics? Do they have a great breadth of coverage, depth of coverage? Do they write high quality content on this topic? Because all of that contributes to them having this ranking. So if I can bring aspects of or data points or metadata about the competitor's approach, their content strategy, and their off-page factors like link totals, overall link authority, or even link velocity, which means the amount of links their pages typically get over time or have historically gotten over time. If I can combine those two things, I can have a leg up on anyone just doing link-based competitive analysis, which is 97% of what people are doing out there. So.
I was going to say, that's, I think, one of the problem. That's one of the very unique and appealing aspects for me with MarketMuse is that it gives me a raw kind of qualitative score, independent of these other kind of very historical-based approaches to analyzing competition, which is primary link-based, and all the approximations of domain authority and things like that. I don't, to my knowledge, they don't take any kind of content quality. They just kind of mainly looking at links and maybe some other social signals or something like that. But that's primarily it. So yeah, that's one thing I look at. I do like to still add a qualitative aspect to it because again, all these things are just tools. One thing I like to do is sanity check sometimes when I'm doing keyword research or topic modeling, and just put in old Google search. And there's some, another little scrappy hack is, okay, if you find a forum result in the top 10 results, to me, even if the tool says it's really competitive, or the tool says, maybe it's not giving me the same level of information. If I see a forum result, it's like, wow, forums are like an anachronism essentially. So if you can find one of those, it's like you hit the gold mine basically. I have a higher degree of confidence even than what the tool is telling me that I can compete there.
Well, that's actually a really interesting component. Not to get off into a rabbit hole on that, but identifying SERP features that are typically indicators of low competition zones. That's something that is a learned skill. So you've named one of them. That's worth the price of admission today. But also other ones would be: is there a PDF in SERP? Is there that's one to look at? Is there a page that has a unsavory link profile insert? So those are things you're looking for that can be indicators that you might not get from just looking at off-page factors. So I think that's really awesome. There was a question that just came in about is what you're speaking about just an avenue of latent semantic indexing? And latent semantic indexing, another search engine optimization vocabulary word. How do you consider this and LSI or latent semantic indexing? How do you consider that different? What types of research strategies do you have that might differ from that?
Yeah, I mean, I would kind of defer to you on the LSI keywords. I think there's a distinction probably to make between LSI keywords and kind of what MarketMuse does.
Right. Yeah.
But I'll kind of let you answer that. But
Sure.
that's, I think LSI keywords is one specific thing which I think has its own origins of usage and what people mean by that. But it gets thrown around a lot. So I'd defer to you, Jeff, on like, let's do what's the distinction there in your mind?
So just what makes us different, we look to evaluate subject matter expertise within large quantities of content to say, if I were giving off the signals that I really knew what I was talking about when I was answering this question or covering this topic, what are the characteristics of the content that I would have built? And that could be one page, that could be a collection of pages, that could be an entire site. So when you're talking about more advanced topic modeling, it's not just looking at query patterns. It's not looking at social data. It's really looking at getting underneath what does it mean to be about this concept, a much more of a relevance focused view. So that's how we kind of bring different perspective on these things. What you'll often see in the market is the perspective that you can just look at the top 10 search results, for example, and take their information and then plop it and parse it out and do that. We all know, because of some of the screens we looked at before, from how Google Hummingbird works, how RankBrain works, that does not solve the puzzle, and that we're all looking to solve with writing great content that addresses kind of common characteristics that you would, if you really knew everything about best running shoes, what are the things that would be there? If you really knew everything about content marketing strategy, but you never wrote about buyer personas or target audiences, that's just weird. Right? And so LSI is going to give you a particular level of quality of results. You really have to take that one step further and start thinking about, if you really knew what you were talking about, what would you have built? And that's what we bring with our AI technology. But just switching, and so hopefully that answers a couple of the questions that were in there. Just switching gears, because Ewen, you are the master of niche targeting. Everyone asks me about you. It's like, how do you find these targeted niche? Like the old adage of keyword research, you had high volume, high competition. You had high volume, low competition, low, and low high. And how do you find those profitable zones that are worth applying resources?
Yeah, so I mean, there's always a kind of classic market analysis. So you kind of want to know obviously the value of your conversion. Kind of for me, so it's like cost per click is a good kind of approximation. I also look at for affiliates, it's affiliate conversion. What does a sale basically get me? But then, so that's very important data. Kind of set that aside. I'll try to target the ones that are higher value first and try to see what I can do. But for me, it's really about doing that kind of like high level trend analysis, seeing, okay, where's the puck going with certain niches. For example, there might be some very established niches that are just getting more competitive because they've been around forever, but there are like maybe some new emerging ones like smart home technology where you might have a little bit more room to maneuver. So kind of, I start out with it being very tuned into macro trends. But then basically I try to filter by as much as I can by the lowest competition, because I think that even if people have covered this before, many people in the industry, but if you can find a keyword, let's say it only gets a few hundred searches per month, but it's like basically has no or zero kind of zero people that are properly targeting that keyword, then you can basically own that keyword relatively easily. So that's what I'm trying to look for. And again, the topic modeling. So I like to basically extrapolate that to a niche and say, how can I analyze data kind of in mass to find the signals that, hey, this niche is low competition? I think the problem with a lot of keyword tools is that they were built in an age where everyone was building exact match domains. So, like best runningshoes.com, for example, just using an example, doesn't tell the whole story about that niche. It just talks about specifically about the phrase best running shoes. If you find that in a keyword tool. So that's really what, I want to look for. I want to look at how do we look at running every single possible search result that has the phrase running shoes or the combination best and running, and then build a model of all the possible topic trees within running, and again, tackling that avatar. So again, it's about how do we basically analyze data in mass to achieve results that indicate, hey, this is a low competition niche as a whole, not just that we found a keyword needle in a haystack type approach.
No, I think that that's much more robust and something you can build a business off of than just trying to hunt for that individual item. Some of the tactics you mentioned, we reference them as competitive cohort profiling. It's really reverse engineering your competitors to say, how did they approach this? What's the cadence of content that they published? What are their typical tendencies when they write content about this? How well is it done? When they write content about that, are there sections of pages that we should have as part of the rubric or the outline of our pages to ensure that we're writing better content than them every time? And I know that that's a part of the process that you were outlining, but I think it's something that's really important when you're analyzing pages. A page is not only as valuable as the words it ranks for. You really got to dig in and understand, why is it doing this? Is it ranking for pages and not satisfying the user intent for queries? That's what you're talking about with that intent mismatch. Someone searched for this, they got this page, they clicked on it, they didn't have a great experience. Well, I want to create that great experience. And when I can do that, I'm going to have success 100% of the time in a low competition zone. So, no, I think that's a great identified gap analysis, as well as it's a value gap analysis, not just a keyword gap analysis.
Exactly. And oh, by the way, that's like, again, you look at, I think I was just reading an announcement this morning about Google's, like, they're going to be using AI, whatever, to influence their search factors. And, I think they're more and more leaning on user experience, as a ranking factor. Are people finding what they're looking for? Are they clicking the back button? So I think, that's a separate topic, but I think by definition, that kind of puts a little pressure on the old model of, just throwing a bunch of links and kind of getting a very basic level of content, just making sure you have the keyword in the title type thing.
No, and that's a great point. And so the other piece I wanted to kind of touch on was related to user intent. And you've talked a lot about items that are further down the buy cycle. So you want to figure out what's, when you're making that decision, and having that ideal content that's going to drive that decision. So how do you think about elegantly answering common questions with content? So, a lot of times people will say they'll have questions, and do I just answer them? And how do you weave in these common customer problems or prospect problems when you're writing a collection of content?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's helpful to bucket, just like kind of like we have here, is put things in different buckets. Literally, like in my wireframes of my sites, it's like, okay, this is the informational, the how-to style content, the tutorial style content. Here is the very commercial, like the buying intent phrases, and then and et cetera, et cetera. I think that's generally, the first thing to do, what I do with all my sites, is just literally do a map. I think that's the most helpful thing you can do, of all the different buckets of not only by intent, but also by maybe subtopics and things like that. And so you can really create that tree and the plan of attack for, how you're going to, go about that. And I think in a very, I guess I've seen people have success by just answering singular questions on a page. How do you tie your tie? Okay, step one, this is how you do it. I've also seen success by incorporating like the complete A to Z guide to, tying tie knots or something. And I think I'll defer to you, Jeff, but I think that's kind of like a strategic decision that you can make, of how do you break those out into separate pages, or do you keep them on one page? I generally try to keep them on a bigger resource. I love creating big guides. So, let's see, you're in the RV space, right? The ultimate guide to buying, an RV, and it goes into all the different factors and all the different questions. One thing I'm more recently on a kick with.
Isn't that just a one-word article that says rent it?
Yeah, exactly. It just says rent it and go here. And
Sorry,
then it ranks first page every time. So one thing I like to do is actually incorporate questions into those big pillar pieces. So I actually now, one of the playbooks we use is we call it FAQ. So it's like, and you can even use now the structured data you can actually use for that. but essentially what are commonly asked questions about this broader topic, like, should I buy, when's the best time to buy an RV? When, should you buy, what's the difference between a, I don't know, a fifth wheel. I'm not an expert on RVs, but, and the different models and things like that. And literally have a call out section just for that. And that ends up, even if you don't use a tool like MarketMuse and just incorporate that as an element of your content, you're going to end up answering questions, and again, scrappy hack alert. You can go to Amazon and look at, for a product, any given product, what are people frequently asking about that product, and kind of assess, okay, people keep asking about, does this come with batteries or not? And then you can incorporate a section, does this come with that, on your, not verbatim, of course, but that's, or look at sites like Quora, Reddit, what are people frequently asking about this product, and then incorporate that into content.
Sometimes a poorly optimized forum, a hot forum with lots of passionate users, can be a lovely, lovely description of the buy cycle.
Exactly.
That's a good tip there for sure. I think that no matter what the offering is, if you can find that there are passionate people about everything. In most cases, if it's something that people are buying, can you identify common questions for troubleshooting area, even post sale content can be very valuable in driving interest to awareness and interest in decision making content. So I think that's an awesome tip for sure. I got a couple questions about, do you ever target multiple? Oh, this is a great question because it's just weaved in. So much nastiness is weaved into this question. Do you ever target multiple keywords with one page? And I'll just set it up and say, try not to target any keywords with one page. It's really focusing on, does this exhibit that I know what I'm talking about with regard to the answers that the questions that I'm looking to answer for users? And then making sure that you're not doing anything kind of silly and just leaving off those keywords. That's going to be enough to make your pages worth a lot of, variance, or that term pool is going to grow. And then you can make great decisions about the next pages you're going to build. And I'm wondering, how do you approach that?
Yeah, so this is a very good question, because I think what it gets at is there is probably a line that, and it's a blurry line sometimes. When does this deserve to be its own topic, right? And I think there are two ways. There are two ways you can do that. You can either take the approach of, I'm going to create these massive articles, essentially, which I think Google likes now. Google certainly likes having, there's been numerous studies say longer content tends to perform better. However, I do think sometimes it can get very overboard, where you have an article that, I don't want to read the manifesto, right, on like the origins of running, like running began in, whatever, this year, this time. So I think there's a balance here. I think it's about, this is where I get back to the user experience too, and maybe this is partly getting at like navigational aspects too. But like, how are you actually? How's the content structured? Are people actually able to find the answer buried in your massive pillar content? I tend to look at those keywords as indicators of, okay, this is a topic that has lower competition. This is maybe the head term I'm looking at, but like, what are the supporting terms? And again, taking a basket approach. What belongs in this basket? What belongs in the other basket? So for example, maybe if you're talking about running, again, underpronation, overpronation, those, if you're doing what are the best running shoes for either one, you might want to separate those out into two, but you also want to interlink them and make sure that they're relevant. So I think the way you can accomplish this is, solving the problem of where do you target keywords, is building a site that's really well interlinked. And the way I kind of like to do it, just again, this is speaking from experience, is I try to, again, think of it as layers. So like, if you're taking of navigational content, kind of the top, which maybe shows up in the menu, might be an article that says how to find the best running shoes. And it's just kind of this big buying guide where you go through, it's like all the different possible problems you could have. What kind of feet do you have? Overpronation, underpronation, bad knees, running for, what kind of running are you doing? And then within these little sections, we talk about the high level of like, hey, if you have overpronation is something some of the things you should be concerned about, but then I link out to a sub article in context that then I didn't create an even more in-depth resource specifically on that problem, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And it's almost like a Wikipedia of buying intent, if that makes sense. Buying
No,
intent.
I think it's right on. And, we, just the small shill section here is we have a solution for identifying great internal and external linking strategies for your site, as well as questions. But I think that identifying the, what's the right level of resource that one would expect, or if you're doing it from a competitive analysis standpoint, something that's differentiated as well. So what you're providing is equal to or better than what's out there. I think there's also one strategy that you'll find just recently with some very, very authoritative sites where pump and point is the nomenclature. They're saying building out these long form, big authoritative networks, spending lots of money, and then pointing a lot of value towards short landing pages that convert. You'll see that sparingly in very, very high competition zones. But everyone else is really, just trying to figure out what's the best experience. Outside of that kind of exception, you're going to find that it's going to be, query dependent. And that's the nature of the game right now. It's really understanding your audience and understanding the types of content that they want to consume. Sometimes you've got to build shorter content that answers a specific question that takes a different angle. Your complete guide is for this audience. Maybe your angle page for your pronation is for experts, and that's something you can do very, very well with a documented content strategy. Our generalist guides are for this. Our specialist items have a different degree of vocabulary.
100%. There's so many levels in between. And again, I think what's helpful to avoid getting overwhelmed is to really just lay those all out on paper, before you start a project, and understanding what are the layers, what are the flows basically of this information, if you will.
No, I think that's great. So lightning round, everyone wants to know, you can tell as much as you'd like. What goes into a site assessment for you? What goes into your site audit? What can you share about the factors that you look into when you're evaluating opportunity on a content site? Or an affiliate site, or an e-commerce site, or whatever type of site? What are the things that you would be looking for outside of just competitive analysis, which you cover pretty extensively? So,
yeah. So I think I can speak to it from kind of there's two different perspectives. From building a site from the ground up, or actually maybe a little bit more apt would be, hey, if we're looking at a site to buy, one of the worst things the bad indicators, just starting there, is when I see content that is just poorly written, or content that is maybe from a non-native speaker, just disjointed. I find that it's often more expensive to recreate like content that just is, I'd say it's like C content, maybe C+ content. It's a lot easier, and this is what we kind of look for in a lot of our acquisitions, is finding super passionate, let's use an example of like mommy bloggers who just live and breathe their topic, right? They've raised 5 kids. They know they're like the subject matter experts on babies or homeschooling or whatever you have. And then we kind of look at that content and say, okay, how could we, if all we have to do is come in and add some bullet points and change around the H2 tags and create some rich tables and maybe update the design, that's an easy win for us. What's really difficult is when just it's really shoddy content. Not that you can't fix that, but you're going to end up kind of having to reinvent the wheel, and start. You may as well start a site from scratch, unless it has an amazing link profile or something like that. Which, odds are, if it has poor quality content, it probably has a poor link profile. But that's just a gut feel for me.
That's such a bitter old SEO response to a question. It's like, unless it's got a really great link profile.
Yeah, exactly.
we will, in the end, we'll all bow down to a really beautiful link profile. But that's an interesting component. So what other things are you looking for?
Yeah.
For like an e-commerce site or those type of things? I know that you're not buying explicitly sites that ship product now. Right. But if you were, what things would you be looking for?
Yeah, I think, again, it depends on a little bit of the lens by which you are looking at? Are you trying to buy the perfect business that's fully automated, that everything's wonderfully done, and you're just trying to run it for passive income? That's one use case. However, it's not something we're looking at. Where is there a mismatch, essentially? Where do we have a circle of confidence that the previous owner or the prospective seller of the business did not have confidence? So perfect example is, we bought a site in the, survival and preparedness space. It was from a very passionate blogger, or someone, a practitioner of this idea. There was duplicate content all over the place. There was, it was literally 5 years of WordPress archives to kind of sort through and re-engineer. And there was, kind of haphazard interlinking, things like that. But we looked at our tool set and we said, oh, these are things we know. The previous owner did not really target buying intent keywords, a ton of really high value informational content. And so we look at that as kind of like the holy grail of an acquisition. Someone who you can't really fake that. You can't, you can, hey, using MarketMuse, you can try, but to really get that authentic person that lives and breathes what their subject matter is, and then be able to then take that site and apply these more professional optimizations to it. That's kind of the mismatch we're looking for. We're constantly looking at mismatch. Where's our confidence, and where is the seller doing something that we could never really replicate or kind of engineer, basically.
I always think about what you're doing in good portfolio businesses as the modern brick and mortar to digital transformers. So I think that there's a class of companies that came out in the late 90s to early 2000s where they were taking like the best fence company in Eastern Washington, and they were putting them online and crushing it. And just, you're taking that to kind of another modern level where it's people that, they've got the equivalent of a wonderful site about, everything you wanted to know about fences. Only they have set up 1 million fences and they know everything about it. You can't fake that. I mean, you just can't. And so, but you can put that in a lens of making money, of conversion rate optimization, of A/B multivariate testing, of user experience design, of content strategy, and you can crush it. And you're doing it, and that's really awesome. So I think that's really cool. So we've got a bit of a lightning round at the tail end. Structured data is all the rage. Voice search is all the rage. How do those two things combine? And what should you do to be thinking about that? And I'll add a star onto that one for position 0, which is the hottest thing to talk about right now.
100%. So I really like the structured data. I like digging into that. Kind of, again, the hard part about Google is they're never going to tell you exactly what to do, but you're going to have to kind of parse through. I think starting with voice search, I think there's been a lot kind of I don't want to say hype, but a lot of excitement about, hey, everyone's moving to voice. I think, like with so many changes, like there's this growing roar that is kind of like not necessarily maybe it's where the puck might be going, but it's easy to get so spun up about that you can entirely change your whole business model. But then you end up sitting around for 3 to 5 years waiting for it actually to arrive. Like, I don't know, like crypto might be another example of excitement, but then like there's
what's crypto? No, I'm just kidding.
So the way I approach voice search is I'm kind of I'm betting that Google is going to want to figure out how to take high quality content as it exists today and basically create, high quality voice results. And so the only thing I'm practically doing every day with this is phrasing things in questions more. Questions and answers, being able to kind of to structure it in a way that, hey, as opposed to saying top 18 best protein supplements, I'm saying, what are the top protein supplements? Just something simple like that. That'll be able to be easily translated into a voice result. Maybe it's just I don't know enough about it, but that's pretty much what I'm doing. I'm just making sure. Again, the Q&As, get back to that, frequently asked questions. And then another thing I'm doing, it's kind of maybe a little bit off the beaten path, but is what I call bottom line up front. Kind of, especially for these long articles where, you see it as maybe it's a summary, a TLDR, whatever you want to call it, but essentially at the beginning of an article, hey, if you have you see these extreme articles like on BuzzFeed, like 57 ways to blah 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 blah. Well, can you just give me the best way, please? And like that's kind of what I do with about it. It's literally, hey, a call out up front that says, if you're in a rush, if you're in a hurry, like I found this is the best XYZ way or product for this problem. And yeah, you can read my entire manifesto on my whole analysis, my research. But if you need a quick result, here it is. And I think that also helps with a lot of, like, again, the position zero type optimizations too. Is there a clear answer to a question that Google can kind of see? And so that's one thing I do. I think getting back to the position zero, other kind of things that, again, I don't have a formula for this, but things that tend to correlate seem to be kind of using tables for certain results. So, you have or bullet points with numbers. So like, if the question is, what are the best blah blah blahs, plural, then you list out the top 5 and you have them numbered, or or you have also like a table with those. Those tend to correlate. Again, getting back to the voice stuff, if you have a clear answer to a question, that seems to correlate for, again, certain queries. And then Jeff, I don't know if you're seeing anything else, but that's mainly.
Those are all awesome things. I think the one thing you said it before with the forums is a tactic. Can you find, and Google is not perfect, right? Can you find a really terrible answer box? Is the snippet that's featured just not actually providing the value that one believes, and really deconstructing how that's happening, and doing a better job at each stage of that process with what you've got, and then crossing your fingers a bit, because it's not a popularity contest, right. but it is trying to reward content that's truly answering that specific questions. And I think that Barry Schwartz, I hope I'm not quoting somebody else's, he said, is your content answering the question that connects with the query as well as the next 5 questions? That's something that really, taking that to heart right now, has an impact on just building enough momentum. Imagine that snowball of intent. I'm solving this many, now I'm solving this many, now I'm solving this many. And now I'm solving a lot of common buyer questions. And if I can get there with structured data, if I can get there with, adding a section to each one of my pages that addresses, the hubbub in the forums in an elegant way, all of those things can tactically lead to long-term success. And so I think that's totally appropriate. As a question, I will mention one thing you said. Google doesn't necessarily tell us how it does it. That is true. However, if anyone has not read the Quality Raters Guidelines or the QRG, go download it today and read it. It's 300 pages. You can do it this weekend. And it walks through, it walks through a little bit of how human raters at Google think about the web. And if you go back in time and look at the historical record of the QRG, you can learn how Google has evolved their human rating systems as well. And that's something that you can really glean and see, is this something that it will likely continue to evolve? That's the key to this, that Ewen touched on that made me think about it. It's they will likely evolve. The puck will likely go this direction because historically it has evolved in this direction with the way that they've evaluated things from a human perspective. So I like to try to hedge my bets there by thinking about what has evolved in the past. Scammy link stuff has evolved to now being real tough. Be thinking about, has this thing that I'm targeting, that I'm spending a lot of money on, this tactic, have cohorts of this tactic evolved into being obsolete? I might not want to spend that much money on that.
100%. I think that's where, I think for me, it's where MarketMuse comes in. It's, I think I was one of the earlier customers of kind of the original version, and I immediately saw, like, hey, this is what I've been trying to do for so long. Like I would get a ton of flack from people because I am in the nerdy SEO community, because I would be building sites 100% based off of my market and keyword research with zero intentional link building. So, and people would be like, what, you built that site to that with zero links? That's not possible, you know? And so now it's like, hey, this is a tool that actually really makes that a reality. And I've kind of evolved my thinking too. I'm not against links. You know, I think, you know, they can be helpful. You can do some outreach. It's certainly part of a holistic strategy. But, you know, I think, you know, 3 or 4 years ago, that was not a very popular opinion. And you kind of get people looking at you with 3 heads. Just, you know, it's interesting. That to me, like MarketMuse is like exactly what the doctor ordered in terms of being able to kind of in an analytical way present what I was kind of gut feeling my way to for so long.
Right. It's that data. And I was in the same boat, you know, I had built all of these workflows manually. How do you do one analysis? And how do you take someone who, you know, a competitive cohort or somebody they're taking lists out of their favorite keyword tool and they're organizing them by volume and they're going down the list. I can pick anyone like that apart. And I could never put a process against it until we built MarketMuse Suite. But if you see, you know, people driving the bus in that regard, or they're going long tail hunting on, like I mentioned, that those are tactics that just don't work. And MarketMuse certainly can provide those insights. There's a number of other services, you know, agencies that do target those types of strategies that you can adopt. But I think that's an awesome way to wrap things up today. And you and I think that this has been extremely helpful. You gave away a few secrets. I can't believe you did. Next time anyone finds some forums in the search results and they're doing some intent modeling on there, you can thank Ewen for that. Any last words before we wrap things up?
No, this has been great. Very always good to chat with you. And you know, I'm happy. You know, I don't know what the mechanism is, but if you ever want to do follow up or, you know, some feedback on this, or people just want to reach out to me and have follow-up questions, I'm very much a kind of paid forward type of person. So nothing gives me greater pleasure than to see someone else like breaking through with a business or a model. And yeah, just a kind of an open book. So maybe it's not a good thing, but for my own sake. But I do like to share this stuff and pay.
No, I think it is, and even a little bit over 3 years ago, we've been working together. You actually gave us, talk to us about portfolio development, and that, and how that is a business model that's going to be exciting in the future. Hey, and guess what? Now you've got 2 businesses that you're working with, doing just that. So I think that we all appreciate that, and there's a lot of great feedback in the chat already about this being really valuable, and thanking both of us, but mostly we're just thanking you. Thanks again, everybody. Cheers.